The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to go on the mat. The Cedar Valley's longest-running radio show devoted entirely to wrestling. Brought to you by Rolling Ford and the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum on 1650 The Fan.
It's that time on the mat. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, joined by the human megaphone, Doug Van Gelder.
Thank you, Kyle.
You have the
How you doing?
Voice. Good, man. You don't need technology.
You know, that was one of the fun things wrestlers have told me over the years, that they can always pick my voice out of the crowd. You know, T.J. Miller's told me that, and Steve Farrell, just a lot of guys. You know, we knew when you were there.
Yeah, well, I know when he's there at wrestling meets. It doesn't have to be a competition. You know when Doug's in the crowd. And talking about T.J. Miller, he wants to get on the show, and I'm assuming it's because of what we're going to talk about today, and that's rule changes. But he said, when can I get on the show? Of course, T.J. Miller is the son of Jim Miller, who's the head wrestling coach at Loris right now. T.J. won an NCAA championship at Wartburg. Cedar Falls wrestler. You coached him in junior high. Went to Cedar Falls High School, placed 4th and 6th. Never won a state championship, but then really excelled at the highest level when he went to Wartburg. And he has some things he wants to get off his chest.
Oh, good.
And so we're working to line it up. I tried to get it today, but it didn't work out because he's at a camp. But I think he has some things he wants to talk about. And when he approached the subject, he said, I don't even care if we talk about Loris. He said, I have some things I need to talk about and get off my chest. So I don't know what that could be. I don't know what's on his mind.
Boy, he's a chip off the old block, isn't he?
He's different, though.
I know.
He's a chip off the old block, but the way I would describe T.J. Miller is that he is Joe Breitbach from Joe's Nighthawk and Jim Miller combined.
Okay.
I think that he has picked up a skill set along the way that allows him to see the promotion mind, where I think Jim Miller will tell you that he wanted to coach and then he would delegate that out to someone else. And so maybe he's not in a position where T.J. Miller has a Joe Breitbach that he can turn to.
I see.
Or a Jerry Rowling or a Greg Stockdale, where the reality is when you're at Wartburg, you're supported at a Division I level and possibly beyond, because it's unprecedented what they have at the Division III structure. And Eric Keller, the current head wrestling coach, has said that sometimes you have to pinch yourself how great of a situation they have and how well supported they are. It's pretty remarkable what's going on at Wartburg year in and
Does
year out.
Augsburg have the same thing?
I think so. I think they have similar support structure. When
Okay.
you think about Alan Rice putting in all the money for
I
a
think
new
that's
wrestling
probably
room,
true
I think
for
it's just a way that you can get supported when people want to get behind you.
Any championship team has got that person.
Yeah,
I think.
I do too, and I don't think you go it alone. I think, in fact, I know you don't.
It takes a group of people.
It
I
does.
understand.
Yeah, and Gable will say that, who is on the show. What a great show to get excited about. You have Dan Gable and Jim Ross on the program today. Just makes you smile that we have both these guys on as we go into Pro Wrestling Weekend. And Dan Gable is going to be there on Friday, July 21, with his professional wrestling counterpart, who they're not related, but Chad Gable is his ring name. He was an Olympian in Greco-Roman in 2012, so both of those guys are going to be at the Pro Wrestling Show. And Jim Ross, the legendary voice of WWE, and he's legendary in a lot of ways. He was talent relations, did the play-by-play commentary for WWE, and is a huge football fan. So we'll talk to him about a slew of topics, including his team, Oklahoma, lost its head football coach in Bobby Stoops. So we'll get his take on that and why he feels like he left the program and what that's going to look like for the Sooners going forward. So Dan Gable, Jim Ross, stick around for that. But you're right in that it's you have the passion, and it takes beyond just one person, and Dan will talk about that too. Hey, the Carver family stepped up. You had a lot of support right away because of the Dan Gable legacy. That's why they were able to excel so quickly, is because they had the support structure.
Well, we look at college a lot on this program, not high schools, but a lot. But you think about the whole town of Gilbertville. I mean, that whole town is behind that program over there. And that size of community, they really put a lot of pride into that. So it happens at every level. You've got to have somebody that's out there always, helping out to do things.
I would say you're right. I think Gilbertville Don Bosco has that. I went to one of their pre-kickoff socials that they had, and I was blown away by the level of support. It's probably better than a lot of D1 programs, the support they get. If you go down to a North Carolina, I'm guessing they don't have the support that Gilbertville Don Bosco has. LaPorte Union has the same situation. They're absolutely supported, and they will do whatever it takes to get you to the next level. And sometimes participation numbers are going to be lower, but they're going to invest in you. And a guy like Trey Clark, who's a 3-time state champion, he's still involved with the program, and I think that says a lot for what LaPorte Union does.
I'm going to say this is a clue to what needs to be done in the Cedar Valley here. I know Waverly Shell Rock has that great community support. Maybe Waterloo, Cedar Falls need to look at that a little closer and see if you really want to have a championship team, get out there and get behind it.
I think it's coming, especially from what I see. I think that Waterloo East for sure, because we have the Waterloo Kids Club coming through there with the future Trojans. I see it at Waterloo West with some of the things that Alex Dolly's doing there, just even having a practice this week on Thursday at the Gable Museum and then helping us. And I think with Michael Kelly getting that job, I know Sean Kelly gets behind things, his dad, and they have that great wrestling room, the USA Mat Club. Sean Kelly is a guy that's going to invest in you and he's going to support. And I think that when you have that family infrastructure in place, I think that they're going to be successful just because of the Kelly family and what they're going to do to make sure that they're success. So I'm excited about what Michael Kelly can do with that program. I think he has. It will be good to see. Yeah, I think he has the pedigree for it. I think he has the mentality, the temperament, and I think he has great facilities too with USA Mat Club and just what they can do. They have a family that wants to get behind the sport. And when you have Sean Kelly showing up to our golf tournament, he's showing up to other things that we do just because he wants to support the sport, that goes a long way.
Absolutely.
And when you see that and you see who gets behind you, that certainly does mean a lot to how you can grow a program. And I don't know how well you know Michael. I've been around him limited, but I think I like what he's going to do.
I haven't been around him a whole lot. I just, I've known Sean for a long time, but haven't really been that, involved with his kids' wrestling. So
yeah. Well, stick around for Dan Gable and Jim Ross on the show. We want to make sure we continue the countdown. We're just a couple days away from the George Trigos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame weekend, July 20 through 22. Contact us if you're interested in attending. And we mentioned TJ Miller wanting to get on the show. I'm assuming part of that is going to be rule changes and a few that have come down the pipe. Some you like, some you don't, some we both don't understand. So I think in the future we need to get an official to clarify some of what's going to happen. Some new weigh-in rules, weight allowance. They will have back-to-back dual meet competitions occur. All competitors receive a 1-pound weight allowance on the second day. Facial hair, which doesn't affect you, Doug, but it does me a little bit, has to be, let's see, facial hair up to half an inch in length. So you can have. You can look
scruffy, hair, but can't have a dignified-looking beard.
Right. And I think one that's interesting, punishment for violating weight management process are as follows. First offense, you're out 8 consecutive competitions. Second offense, you're out for the year. So they're getting real tight on that. And that includes
I'm not
making
sure
weight
what
with
that means.
Well, it means rubber suits, making weight with saunas, just some of those weight management things that are in place for the NCAA.
Some of the things that got the sport in trouble at one point. Yeah. It must be coming back in.
Well, that point was 1998 with the deaths of those wrestlers.
3 wrestlers?
Yeah, the 3 wrestlers, and some of it was blamed on creatine, some was on weight management, but that is still having ramifications, and so they're getting tighter on that. And I know that bothers some people about weight management and how that goes. I'm afraid to even ask Gable about that because we have 18 minutes for his segment, and I'm afraid that we could probably go 10 minutes right up to that with Dan's frustration on the inability to use saunas, because he feels like it's an educational process, that as long as you educate people on the proper way to use tools, then there's no reason that we should be in this position. But they're regulating this, and we have to have some rules in place that are going to allow that. The other one that you were confused about, I'm confused about a little bit. When in the neutral position, the referee will verbally announce a danger signal to the wrestlers who expose their shoulders to the mat at any angle less than 90 degrees. The verbal announcement will be followed by an audible 3 count. If the referee reaches the 3rd count and the wrestler is still in the danger zone, the opposing wrestler is awarded a takedown. So what that means is if you're in a scramble and you're floundering on your back, I'm assuming he will count to 3, and then a takedown will be awarded.
But your back has to be exposed in that 3 count.
Past 90 degrees. So they're getting away from that floundering on your back scramble situation that we saw Jesse Delgado and Nashon Garrett from a few years ago in the NCAA Championship Finals. Just one example, but that's what happens is you shoot in, and that was even a double leg. He shot in instead of sprawling. You dive underneath, and because you're quick enough to be able to explode through, Nashon Garrett shot so quick that he wasn't able to execute the takedown. And it's amazing that happens, but that's the rule change. And so it's funny to look at things retroactively and think about how some of these rule changes really impact who would have won or lost NCAA championships. Logan Stieber, with the rule against Jordan Oliver, had they had the rules in place the following year, Logan Stieber likely would have lost the NCAA championship and he would not be a 4-time NCAA champion. So those rules certainly do dictate how you approach the match. And this is one that's really going to affect scrambling. That's what this rule is meant to regulate. Wrestlers limited to a maximum of 6 matches a day. I don't think that's too much of a problem. And just some other things. But the one that you brought up is that if the competition venue wants, you can have a third-party review on the referee. And so I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't know who chooses that, who decides who's going to have the third-party review. But I think that's just a way that officials can keep in check, just like in baseball or the NFL.
I think the way it's being used right now is the officials often go in and look how they can justify their call. You know, they don't want to be challenged on it, so they don't look at the whole thing and the whole situation, I think, a lot of times. I think it's a good deal. You know, we look at it, look at football, basketball. Everything's done afterwards, but it's done by a separate official. Baseball's a big one. You know, so yes, I think this is a good step. It's optional, though, correct?
From what I see, it is optional.
You know, it wouldn't be used in many dual meets, but I could see that it would be used a lot at the nationals and the conference tournaments.
I would think and it might be mandatory for that. Maybe the NCAA championships implement that. Maybe the conference championships will say we're going to implement that.
Send it upstairs. We'll have them look at it.
Right, and I think if we get Mike McCormick, who's the head of officials, on the show, he would say, we don't need that. I can look at my call and say that I was wrong, and it's clear there. But
I don't think they do.
Well, I want his opinion on that. I want to see what he has to say about that as an official, what he thinks, and see how that affects their mentality going forward. And how that's going to impact the sport, because some things got overturned at the NCAA championships, but you know as well as I do, in those mid-'90s, whenever they protested something in the match, it never got overturned. So this is just a way to actually have a tool that says if there's an erroneous call, we can fix it right away.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good thing, other than it stops the pace of the match. And so you look back at the Gable era, hey, what was that? It was just keep the match going, have your shoes tied, don't let anything get in the way of the match. This does put a break in there, and it gives coaches an opportunity to give your athlete a break. You can challenge something if you want to, even if you can say, what are you challenging?
Well, they do limit the number of challenges, correct?
They do, but if you have enough in the NCAA championships and you can get your athlete a break, it's a great tool. Okay. Other thing they'll do, coaches will indicate the intent to use a video review by throwing a red or green foam brick into the competition circle. So taking a page out of the book of international wrestling where they do that. So I think that's a pretty
Speaking
good
of
rule.
International, they had a pretty good, what was that, Grand Prix of Spain?
Grand Prix of Spain, there were 7 champions. 7 wrestlers had 7 champions.
Just 7 wrestlers was
correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, Jaden Cox.
Yeah, he was out. Right.
Yep. They actually.
That's what Bill told us last week.
There was actually a guy that wrestled, I think, on his own, which didn't factor into any of the results for what Team USA is doing because Jaden Cox was not there. But 7 for 7 on the USA Wrestling front, which it wasn't the top-level competition. We know that. It's the Grand Prix of Spain. It was a tune-up tournament, but you have to feel good, especially when there's some dominating victories there. I think a couple guys had 3 10-0, all runs of 10-0, and one was 10-0, 10-0, 10-0, and a 9-0. So you had some of those great matches. Other breaking news, Eric Guerrero out as the associate head wrestling coach at Oklahoma State. He's been there a long time. He's taking over as the Oklahoma Regional Training Center coach, and we only have a few minutes here to talk about it, but I think it's a very interesting topic because you're having some high-profile names in the sport taking over at the Regional Training Center and making that their profession. And with only 77 head coaching opportunities, sometimes these are bigger deals than a Division I coaching job at
how many
non-Big Ten school. Or
how many
are
there right now?
77.
So every school has an
no Division I program.
I'm just saying on the Olympic or the freestyle coach.
Yeah,
how many of those regionals are there?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know that there's an Ohio regional. There's a Penn State has one, Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, Hawkeye Wrestling Club. You have now the Oklahoma Regional Training Center. And it makes sense that Lou Roselli was the head wrestling coach at the Ohio Regional Training Center, also an associate head coach at Ohio State. But with Mark Perry being a high-profile name, taking over as the Hawkeye Wrestling Club coach, and then you have Eric Guerrero taking over that high-profile position, it's changed the game of how the sport is being conducted. That these are some pretty high-profile positions, and I think they're saying that in a lot of ways, if you're a big name and you want to take over this program, you're still going to have a lot of clout going that route, and you don't have the pressure of the day-to-day operations of a Division I program. You get to work autonomously a little bit, and it's a pretty good gig because you just get to coach. You get to coach high-level athletes in a high-level environment. I think for a guy like Mark Perry, that's a pretty good situation.
How is funding handled at that level?
I don't know enough about the funding. I think that you probably have benefactors that want to see these things thrive, and they know
so the USA Wrestling doesn't.
No, I don't think so. I think that these programs are independently funded. I don't think USA Wrestling has a hand in it. I think that from what I've seen is you have regional training sites, but then you can also have Titan Mercury Wrestling Club subsidize some of your training stipend.
Is there a regional one out west anywhere?
I think Fresno State has started one.
Okay.
Yep. And I think Joe Colon actually went out there for a coaching job. Dylan Peters is now out at Central Michigan, took an assistant coaching job there. So some Northern Iowa talent is going elsewhere throughout the country.
Blaze went out.
He's out at Fresno State. So I know that Terry Steiner's smart enough to have one of those. So I think that it's being popular right now, and I think when you have high-level athletes wanting to get to the next level, you pretty much have to have one if you're going to be competitive. I think that's the standard right now, and that's the direction that the sport is moving. Have 10 seconds here to go. That means I have to wind this segment down, but we have the ultimate guest coming up next. You know him. His name's Dan Gable. He's the namesake of our museum. He's next on the mat.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When all you want is sports, all you need is 1650 The Fan.
We are back on the mat, 1650 The Fan. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, along with Doug Van Gelder. We have the ultimate guest on this segment. He's the namesake of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, 72 Olympic champion, didn't surrender a point, 15 NCAA team championships for the University of Iowa, and he is going to be in Waterloo, Iowa this Friday, July 21, for the Impact Pro Wrestling Show. Doors open at 5:30. Show starts at 6:30. Welcome, Dan Gable.
Hey, love being on this radio station.
Well, we love having you on. Let's start with the new book that you have out. It's been a lot of fun to learn from the book. I think there's some Gable-trained principles that a lot of people can learn about the book. How much fun was it to have a second book written that you get to articulate more of your philosophy and get the general public learning more about how to be great?
Well, I kind of write the book because I really like to influence people in positive ways, and it's kind of interesting how my life has gone, and for being able to be successful at high levels for that long of a period, there's got to be a few not really secrets, but a few common traits that I've done in my career. So I'm happy to put them out there, and I do have a lot of stories. I try to keep it entertaining. And, of course, in this last book, Wrestling Life 2, with the help of yourself, Kyle, you've been able to add to it. And I think that the most interesting part, besides just knowing your history and making sure things are correct, is just the fact that you were able to get the other side on some of the stories. And when you get the other side, it's just not my side, then it even makes it that more interesting. So thanks, Kyle.
Well, Wrestling Life 2 is available, and I know that it's been interesting because Wrestling Life 2 is out. The first book is actually picked up. Did you expect that to happen?
No. I'm not in the book business, even though I've been a part of books my whole life. People have been writing chapters. I actually did a wrestling book, technical and tactical, and I did it in kind of an entertaining fashion as well. So that's why I think it's still selling, even though it's outdated on some of the rules of freestyle. But no, I enjoy the process. Yeah.
Well, the process of weight cutting has been a topic of conversation, and if we could just spend a couple minutes on the new weight rules about losing 8 competition dates if you do not follow the weight cutting protocol, or you could lose the season on the second offense. Do you like what they're implementing in the NCAA?
No, I don't like it. And I think the reason why I don't like it is because how it ended up being to this point in time where wrestlers are the only athlete in college that actually can't use certain recovery tools, certain hygienic tools to help their career just because they thought that, maybe some of these devices that are used for weight loss, are the cause of some kids dying back in the day. I don't think they should be used from a point of view from anything from educational purposes and anything from, that helps your performance and recovery and all that. But we definitely are a sport that when you get done, you need to be able to go through a cleansing process. Because when somebody goes skin to skin for 2 hours in a practice session, their chances and level of actually walking away with some type of skin abrasion or even picking up something from the mat or somebody's shoes off the floor or whatever are higher. And, the process of recovery and hygiene happens to be the showers, the saunas, the soap, the cleanliness of the clothes, the cleanliness of the mats are all a part of the process. And we are the number one sport that you are skin to skin. And so because of that, just for an example, for me, I never, and hardly any of my kids ever were able to have skin problems. And, and I'll tell you what, when you're a kid and you're coming out and you come home and your mom and dad see all of a sudden you have this issue, sometimes they'll say, this sport isn't, hey, I don't want you to have that, So, it's just a matter of fact, and science shows that you use a cleansing process of a certain things, and if you sat in the sauna, for an example, for a short period of time after practice, it's good for your muscles, but it's also good for your recovery in terms of your brain, and thought process. But it cleans you, and it takes away, and it kills the bugs that are there. So that's part of it. But anyway, no, I think it's totally ridiculous. But I also think that a lot of the coaches haven't implemented, and some of the kids still would go about the weight-making process in a stupid manner. And because of this, and just because of some places do have these available tools, and they think that they're probably using them, then they're saying, well, if I can't have them, then I don't want them to have them. So they're being little babies, as far as I'm concerned. They're being childish, and they're not thinking about the sport. They're only thinking about their own situation. And because of that, we're kind of set back. But do you really have to have it? I think at the high level, yeah, you need all the tools and it's nice to educate people. But, there's other ways of doing this same recovery. Now, I don't know, it's a little more difficult, and it's a little more, not as easy as just when practice is over and you want to continue to use it as a recovery or a hygienic. There's other ways, but it is kind of ridiculous that we would also not only emphasize the weight loss tools for making kids set out, which could be very traumatic. I mean, one program, now you got me started on something here, but one program could have maybe only one really good kid, and say he was wanting to be really good, so he's doing some of the things he should do to be really good, and all of a sudden he is caught with some violation that's ridiculous, and he gets kicked off of the squad for eight dual meets. Now, I don't know exactly how it works, but I imagine if it's in the last part of the season, that would include, I don't know, maybe the tournaments. And then all of a sudden, and the fact that you're trying to build up a program and you maybe only have one or two good kids, and if they fall within this illegal violation, which you could say, okay, well, don't have that kid follow, and don't have that kid get in trouble. Well, when it comes to performance, you got to use, you got to have available the tools that's necessary to be successful. But anyway, you could take away your whole following of a program, and because one kid can help make a program. I mean, one kid wins a national title. You just like Ivan Gadsden, Iowa State wasn't doing so good, but they had a national champion. That was big. I probably actually saved Kevin Jackson's job for a couple of years. That's how big it was. But if you take that away, it's kind of ridiculous. And I think they also are trying to take away the headgear, which is another ridiculous. Headgears, mouthpieces should be a mandatory part of wrestling because, again, it's you're just looking out for the sport. But anyway, you got me started, and I just kind of vetted there. And no, I just if I was the coach right now, I know how to be able to make the same effect, but it's not as easy as utilizing all the recovery tools. But it's a little more difficult, and it shouldn't have to happen. So no, we're our own worst enemy sometimes.
All right, we are on the mat with Dan Gable, namesake of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. He has a new book out called A Wrestling Life 2. And if you want copies, Dan's going to be in Waterloo, Iowa this Friday, July 21 at the Impact Pro Wrestling Show. And you're going to have your WWE counterpart there, Chad Gable. I don't know how much interaction you've had with Chad Gable or Chaz Betts, who was a Greco-Roman Olympian in 2012, made the Olympic team in Iowa City, Iowa. But I know your grandkids like him a lot.
Well, actually, Danny Gavin, that grandkid, I think it comes from his father, Mike Gavin. He's kind of a pro fan when he was a kid, and I think he still is because he's just a bigger kid now. But it's one of these things that he's followed, and so Danny's following it. And of course, that name's kind of close to my name, but Danny. But anyway, no. I think that they've developed a relationship, and I think that I'm going to be up there, and he changed his name from his name to Gable, and I think it stirred up a little action, and it's probably good for that type of wrestling, and it's just making the Gable name more famous, I guess.
And do you follow it at all? Do you kind of get a few updates from your son-in-law about what's going on in the sport or the profession?
Yeah, I think you hit it right there. I'm so into my Olympic wrestling and collegiate wrestling and high school wrestling, scholastic. I mean, the Fargo's going on right now that, there's some great things going on. So, I probably just use my main resources, and my main resource here is probably Danny or Mike Gavin. So, yeah, I can get updated really quick just with good relatives.
We are on the mat with Dan Gable, namesake of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. He'll be at the Impact Pro Wrestling Show this Friday, July 21. Doors open at 5:30, bell time 6:30. Get a chance to be with Dan Gable and Chad Gable. What a great combination to have those two there, along with a host of other people. Shelton Benjamin will be there. You're going to have Jason Jordan, who was also a college wrestler for Indiana. So take a look. Sabu, some other people coming in just because they want to meet Dan Gable. And as we go back to the rule changes, want to get your input and your insight on this 3 count when you break 90 degrees and you're in a scramble. It looks like you're going to get a takedown. Don't know if you followed that rule change very close, but wanted to get your take on that.
Oh, it's going to be one that's really hard. But, until you get into it and experiment with it and really see what effect it's going to be, then we don't really know. But, I think there has been a lot in the last 10 years of just kind of counter wrestling, hanging on and getting a stalemate, that type of thing. Probably way more than when I wrestled, but at the same time, people come up and learn, and there's little waves of things, and people find that that's successful. So I would say that it might work. It's just crazy enough that we got to give it a shot, and if it works, then I think we've got a better opportunity to see more wrestling during a 7-minute period or during a 6-minute period than, a 20 or 30-second stalemate, which takes up a lot of time. So, that's kind of where I'm at. Hey, are we going to talk about the renovation at all?
I'd love to talk about the renovation. Yeah, let's talk about that. There's renovation plans for the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. The Courier's covered it, KWWL. But your thoughts on why it's so important to renovate the facility and get to the next level?
Why is it so important? It's because wrestling is not at the authority mark where I'd like to see it. And that means, of course, I always put things, base things on wrestling, but, I'd like to see it the number one sport, and I still think that, everybody should wrestle and at least try it, and it'll take away something from it, from a season of training. And no matter what it is, and whether you're going to be a musician or whether you're going to be a scientist or whether you're going to be a football player, whatever, it's just such a disciplined sport. But anyway, no, I just think that the people in the Waterloo-Cedar Falls area and that should understand that, we have a Dan Gable Wrestling Museum right there in Waterloo, and we're under a renovation process that is really wanting to take it to a new level of technology. We're the only museum in the world, I think, that also has a training facility within just a facility that showcases your sport. So we do have a wrestling room there, and I think it's important that people realize that it's we need to do a lot more for it. We need to have sponsors. We need to be able to advertise on the highway. We need to be able to actually make these renovations with inside so we can affect the local communities even more than we are now, even though we are doing it. But I think our presence really hasn't been what it can be, so the whole area can learn to improve and become an entity, a Waterloo Cedar Falls of a popularity where it's not just now Southeast Pokes taking over, wrestling or other places are really good in basketball or football. You have a building of excellence, and it kind of works out of there. And so we're in an area right now that things are getting transformed a lot, and things are getting fixed up. So we have this chance to fix up this museum, and I really think that we could use some help because it does take money, and we had a budget, and once we looked and saw what we were doing and compared it to what we needed to be doing, we had to double that. We went from, I think, $7.5 million or $750,000 to 1.5 million, something like that. But, it's just that it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it's because, we just haven't had the ability to have the resources to do that. So, I think that, with you being the director, Kyle, and Mike Doty being the fundraising guy, Mike Doty, he could use some local support. And with that, of course, they could call a museum and talk to Mel, talk to you, and they could get the information to Mike. And it's basically 319-233-0745 if you're interested in helping out to make this museum really an exciting museum, updated, and I've had the chance, along with Mike Doty, to go to New York, and when we were there, we visited some of the most current built museums in New York City. And I'll tell you what, we can really showcase what we have right now to a higher level if we can just, get some support locally and really. And the other guy that's really helping us over the years is Bob Buckley. And Bob Buckley is another guy that, if you know him, you can talk to him, along with, the people that I've already told you. So the local Bob Buckley is a guy that usually likes to do things well. And he, when he saw the renovation of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in Stillwater, he told me, he says, I have to see it. And, and I did. And, I was very impressed. So we're not going to let Stillwater get, set down there in Oklahoma and just let Iowa kind of wither away. But because that's not the game. So the wrestling game in Iowa is here to stay. Even though Pennsylvania and Ohio are kind of taking over, we're not setting back. We're taking the challenge. Iowa State just stepped up. UNI, of course, Schwab, and the Brands never take a back seat. So lots of good things going. And even currently with Fargo right now, we're having some Iowa kids that are doing, really well. So
we are out of time.
Looks good.
We are out of time, Dan. Thanks for being on this segment. You can see Dan Gable this Friday, July 21, at the Impact Pro Wrestling Show at 5 Sullivan Brothers Convention Center. Get your tickets by contacting us, or you can get them at the door. Up next, we have Jim Ross, the voice of WWE. Next.
Log on and listen online at 1650thefan.com, the online home of 1650 The Fan.
We are back on the mat, 1650 The Fan. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, along with Doug Van Gelder. We have an icon for our final segment. Not only did he facilitate the greatest talent relations for WWE in the history of the organization, but he might be the greatest play-by-play commentator in the history, regardless of sport. I think he is. His name's Jim Ross. He's with us. How are you, Jim?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Hey, great to have you on the show. I think we need to start out with a little football. You are the biggest Oklahoma Sooners football fan in the country, and you guys lost Bobby Stoops, who has great ties to the University of Iowa. Why did that happen?
Why did it happen?
Yeah.
Well, I think he was ready to retire. I mean, I think just 18 years of he wanted to be a little bit more normal. I don't find it surprising at all, and spend more time with family and enjoy the fruits of his labor. I can relate to that and endorse it. So we have a new coach. It's a great young man, 33 years old, and Bobby left the program and couldn't leave it in better shape. So, but it will not adversely affect our program, I assure you.
You stay in touch with Coach Stoops over the years?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Good. Hey, you've been our biggest supporter. You've been unbelievable. You come to our George Stragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame every year, and you've endorsed us not only through your blog and different ways, through your podcasts. Why have you been such an advocate for what we're doing?
Well, I think it's incumbent on all of us to get back to organizations that support our livelihood. And I'm a wrestling guy, and I've been in pro wrestling for over 40 years. So, that being able to give back to an organization that tries to support and maintain and preserve the legacy of of TV pro wrestling is close to my heart. So the folks there, you guys do a great job, and it's a wonderful facility that I can't encourage folks to visit enough. But it's bottom line, it's the right thing to do. I say this in my podcast every week. Do nice things for others. Maximize life's minutes, because tomorrows aren't guaranteed. And so this is one way that I can give back and one way that I can maximize my minutes.
We are on the mat with legendary commentator Jim Ross. He facilitated talent relations through the Attitude Era, and if you watch professional wrestling during that time, you know what Jim Ross did to elevate professional wrestling. He is the voice of professional wrestling, and as we go into another era, it was an interesting storyline with Kurt Angle and his illegitimate child, Jason Jordan. Great story angle, and we're going to have Jason Jordan and Chad Gable coming to the Gable Museum this weekend, as you will be, July 20 through 22. Do you like this story angle with Kurt Angle and Jason Jordan?
It's sure. I mean, it's pro wrestling. Do I need to like it or do I need to dislike it? I mean, it's fine. It only happened Monday, so I'm of the ilk that I will wait till it plays out to see where it goes. But if it gives Jason Jordan more spotlight and a better opportunity to build a body of work, then I'm all for it. And if Jason Jordan can have a modicum of the success that Kurt Angle's had in WWE, then it's a really good move. I think that it's probably one of those things where it needs to play out. It needs to see how it's going to go. Some people like that kind of stuff. Some don't. I'm of the belief I kind of lay back and see how it's going to play out before I declare if it's good or bad.
You've seen all of the great wrestlers come through. I want to know where you feel like Kurt Angle fits in through the history of the sport as a professional wrestler. Where does he fit in all of this?
Well, he's in that level of great amateurs that transferred to the pros in a very significant way. He's much like Dick Hutton back in the day, Jack Briscoe, obviously, Danny Hodge, best of the group, Brock Lesnar, so many great amateurs. But Kurt would fit in that upper echelon with in any conversation you would have, whether it be an amateur turning pro or just a great pro without the amateur background. Kurt Angle is in that discussion. That's how good he was. And I would venture to say that, much like my friend Toby Keith might saying, I'm not be as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. And I kind of believe that's where Kurt is. I think Kurt could come back and have a match, and it would be pretty phenomenal. And I expect that to happen at some point in time if he's healthy. So Kurt's extraordinary. He changed. He went from the amateurs to the pros about as seamlessly as anybody I ever saw.
As we mentioned, you facilitated the Attitude Era. You were the talent relations manager during that time period. Now that we look back, that was the ultimate era. It's the high point of professional wrestling. When you're going through that era, did you know how special it was?
Well, I got reminded every week when we kept selling out. It was pretty cool. We had a really, it's all about the team, it's all about the roster, talents. Everything about success of that genre is based on talent and television, and we had great television, and we put together a pretty impressive talent roster that's going to send a lot of guys to the Hall of Fame. That's going to send a lot of guys prominently and off into their bank, which is kind of important. So it was special. I didn't know in the long haul that it would remain special for this long, but apparently that Attitude Era at WWE is something that a lot of people look back on with fondness and enjoyment because it was so successful, fun to watch. Sort of helped make my career better, but that's all because of the talent that we surround ourselves with. There were just really, really so many Hall of Fame guys. We were very lucky. We had one class that Jerry Briscoe and I helped put together that included Kurt Angle. Not Kurt Angle. Kurt was in another class. He was a class with Edge and some more guys. But we had, Shelton Benjamin, who's coming to Waterloo this weekend, and Brock Lesnar, John Cena, Dave Bautista, and Randy Orton. Those are 5 really, really phenomenal performers. And in my estimation, the best pure athlete of the group was Shelton Benjamin.
We are on the mat with an icon, Jim Ross, legendary play-by-play commentator for WWE. and he was also the talent relations president during WWE's most successful era, the Attitude Era. He's going to be in Waterloo, Iowa for the George Tragos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame weekend. Don't miss an opportunity to meet him. He's going to be here July 20 through 22 for the entire weekend and the entire weekend's activities. When we look ahead to what you have going on, you have a book coming out. Let's talk about the book and when it's going to be released and what we can learn from your book.
Well, it's going to be released in October. It's right now it's number one on Amazon's charts for pre-orders, so you can pre-order it at Amazon.com. It's called Slobberknocker, My Life in Wrestling, and I wrote it with the late Scott Williams, who will also be honored this weekend in Waterloo. Scott passed away, unfortunately, earlier this year. It's been a rough year for that, and so Scott helped me get started, and then we finished it with Paul O'Brien. And but it just kind of chronicles my life from growing up on a farm in eastern Oklahoma, and only child on a 160-acre farm, and falling in love with the pro wrestling, 1 hour pro wrestling I got to watch every week. My dad was not a fan, but if I did good in school and I did all my farm chores without having to be badgered about doing them and being told every step of the way, I got to watch 1 hour wrestling on Saturday afternoon, and I kind of fell in love with the genre. And so it chronicles that story. It was just an unlikely entry into a wacky entertainment world of athletics and showbiz. So that wasn't my goal in life to do that, but I found my way in it, and it kind of, I guess, was meant to be. I thought it'd be a summertime job, Kyle. It lasted 40-plus years.
Wow. And it's turned into a legendary career. We have an icon on the program with us. Jim Ross will be in Waterloo, Iowa, July 20 through 22. And you've made so many legendary calls, and I love it when I see a YouTube video of a football scene or a football play, and they have the overdub of your voice. Is it nice to know that your calls have had that much impact that it can cross over into other sports?
Oh, yeah. It's fun. It's humbling that other people like your work. There's so much pro wrestling bias, and a lot of that came from over the years from the amateur wrestling world. That the amateur wrestling world didn't want to be associated with their cousin pro wrestling, and I'm glad that those egocentrical, ridiculous issues have subsided immensely, where both organizations can help each other, both entities can help each other grow, support each other as it should. So many amateur guys have migrated to pro wrestling simply because they can continue to use their God-given skills and athleticism and their personalities and make a real good living. So I'm happy for that. But, I'm happy that others have recognized my work. And but it's kind of humbling sometimes. It pops up on social media and on Twitter and things like that. And people are always they have too much. I used to tell my wife they have too much free time. I don't even know how to dub things and all that, but it's kind of cool. It's different. I get a chuckle out of it. My kids like it. I send it to my children when I see something online that's kind of entertaining, and they always laugh about it. So in that respect, it's a good thing.
When did you realize you had a special way to connect with the fans?
I don't know if I've ever realized that. I don't know if I've realized that yet. I just do what I'm lucky that I have a job that doesn't feel like a job. My work has never been cumbersome. I'm very, very blessed in that regard. I've always wanted to be a sportscaster, and being in pro wrestling restricted that somewhat because of, again, the pro wrestling bias. Oh, that's fake, and it's entertainment. Oh, okay, whatever. No kidding. And John Wayne wasn't a cowboy, by the way, even though he was born in Iowa. He wasn't a farmer either. He was an actor. And these guys have great acting skills and amazing athleticism. They do their own stunts. They don't have stand-ins. They work 200-plus days a year. They travel the world doing this stuff because they love it. And it aggravates me sometimes when other people criticize what these guys and ladies have chosen to do for a living. So I just feel like I'm a part of the team. That's all I ever wanted to be, was just on the team and to do my best work. and I still believe my best broadcasting is still ahead of me.
We are on the mat with Jim Ross. He's going to be our master of ceremonies for the George Trigos Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame banquet. He's going to be in Waterloo, Iowa, July 20 through 22. Make sure you catch him. Get to the Impact Pro Wrestling show on Friday, July 21. Doors open at 5:30. You can get into the show. Starts at 6:30. We'll end with this. You have a great line of barbecue sauce. You got to know why that's so good.
Well, thank you. My mother was the influence and the motivator of that project. She made homemade barbecue sauce, and my late wife tried to replicate it as closely as she could. We then went to a commercial route of a company that's been in business over 50 years here in Oklahoma City that makes our barbecue sauces, chipotle ketchup, jalapeno honey mustard, and our seasoning. So it's just kind of a labor of love. It's available online at www.shop.com, and then there's over 200 grocery stores in the southeast called Ingles, Ingles, that sell it. So it's a labor of love, and part of the proceeds of every bottle sold goes to Headlock on Hunger, which your board member Bill Murdoch is the creator of and deeply involved in. So we're giving back everything we can to feed hungry children. So we think it's a great product. It's an homage to my mom and my wife, and it's gluten-free and vegan-friendly and no high fructose corn syrup. It's just really a good, clean, great-tasting product, and it goes to help a good cause. It's not strictly to help JR retire, because JR ain't going to retire.
All right, we've been on with Jim Ross. Great having you on. I have the all-purpose seasoning that I use for everything on my oven, but you get a chance to see a true icon in Waterloo, Iowa, July 20 through 22. Thanks for taking the time, Jim.
You're welcome, Kyle. Look forward to seeing you again. It's always a great time, and the folks that are listening that have been to the museum, shame on you. You don't have to be a pro wrestling fan or an amateur wrestling fan. If you're a fan of Americana, that's what you find there. And I love it every time I come. I enjoy the museum more and more than the last time. So thanks for having me, and I'll see you this weekend.
All right, that was Jim Ross. For Doug Van Gelder and Dan Gable, you've been listening to On the Mat.
You've been listening to On the Mat, the Cedar Valley's longest-running radio show devoted entirely to wrestling. Brought to you by Rolling Ford and the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum on 1650 The Fan.
This show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.